Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi with Business Spotlight. Joining me today is Shari Graydon, who is CEO of Informed Opinions. Thanks for joining us today, Shari.
My pleasure.
Well, let me just start by asking you what your thoughts are about the lack of female representation in all levels of government today. What's it like in that area?
Unacceptable. That's why we launched the campaign. And really, Informed Opinions exists as an organization. We were founded 13 years ago specifically to focus on amplifying women's voices in the media because our research had demonstrated that women are only being quoted or permitted space in op-ed pages and commentary vehicles about 30% of the time. And there's a huge body of research from around the world that documents the extent to which ensuring that women's realities and perspectives and insights and solutions are integrated really significantly impacts the economic performance of a country, its ability to govern on behalf of citizens. And so, the fact that women are at 30% in the media and 30% in politics, there's a persistent issue in terms of underrepresentation.
Why are we so far behind in parity, when it comes to this area? And I'm just curious how we compare to, say, other nations.
Well, this was really a revelation to me. I've been working around women in media for 30 years, and I understood in a significant way all of the factors that contribute to that. But when we moved into looking at politics specifically, and let me give you just a bit of background. So we have a gender gap tracker. It's an automatic online digital analytical tool that scrapes data from websites, news websites in Canada, to determine how often men and women are quoted. And when we did a deeper dive into that data, we discovered that 60% of the most quoted people in Canadian media are elected officials. And so that woke us up to the realization that, okay, if women are underrepresented in politics, that has an impact on everything else, and we need to pay attention to that. So specifically around women's representation in elected office, the reason we're so behind, we're 60th in the world. So 59 other countries are doing better than we are. And that's a huge surprise to Canadians when you ask Canadians, how well do you think we do compared to other countries? Usually they put us at about maybe 15, 20, 25. And they imagine that Northern European countries are further ahead on this, but they're surprised to learn that Mexico is number 4. We're 60th, Mexico is number 4th. That Cuba and Rwanda are also much further ahead than us. And the reason for that is that they have been much more ambitious in seeking to ensure that women's voices are reflected in political office.
Now, Shari, you mentioned a campaign. Tell me a little bit about that. What is the campaign and why is it needed?
So the campaign is called Balance of Power. Balanceofpower.ca. People can visit the website. They can follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. And really, it's a campaign that's designed to make this a focus of public conversation, help Canadians understand that we are really far behind internationally, and that there are no good reasons for that. We have lots of myths around why women are so underrepresented. We're not ambitious. We don't step up. But the truth is much more complicated than that. And if many countries around the world have been able to achieve 50% or very close to it, there's absolutely no reason that Canada can't as well. And so we're looking at what other countries have done, what can we do here in Canada, what remain the obstacles, and how we can overcome them.
Tell me why, not why, but tell me like what we're missing in Canada by not having a more balanced representation between the genders. in government?
So yeah, and that's a useful question. People think, well, really, what difference will it make if women are quoted 50% of the time in the media, or they occupy 50% of the seats on council or in parliament? And the truth is, and this is not rocket science, women's realities and experiences are often profoundly different from men's in so many ways. A few years ago, my husband and I were in Montreal on the day that the previous Pope died,
Mm.
and a TV crew doing streeters approached us and said, "Would you like to comment? The Pope has just died." And I said, "No, I don't think so," and kept walking. And from behind me, my husband, who had not been to church in 40 years, he said, "Sure, I'll comment." And he bowed his head and gravely declared, "It's a very sad day for Catholics everywhere." And his comments made the national news. And as we continued on our walk, I turned to him and said, "Honey, that was kind of obvious. And wouldn't it be great if the next Pope came up with a progressive policy on birth control that wouldn't trap millions of poor Catholic women around the world in an endless cycle of childbearing and child rearing?" And my husband said, "Yeah, Shari, that would have been great. Too bad you turned down the interview." And I knew better. I'd been the national spokesperson for two women's organizations. I'd been the press secretary to a premier. I had worked in and around the media, but I had declined the interview because I didn't, think that my comments on the Pope were relevant. And what that experience reminded me was that, most women spend decades of our lives either trying to avoid becoming pregnant, trying to become pregnant, or dealing with the consequences of having been pregnant, which, as wonderful as they may be, change everything. They change our bodies, our brains,
Mm.
our ability to multitask, our perception, our priorities, everything. And so, those are just the sort of biological differences, but socially, the way we are treated and seen uh, also differ in so many respects. And so,
Mm.
given those different experiences, given that we're half the population, if a government or democracy writ large, including the news media, have an interest in making sure that our realities and perceptions are reflected in public conversations, in policies, in programs, in spending, we need to be at the table, because men are necessary, but they're not equipped to represent women's realities. So,
Yeah.
and the just to put a research point on it, there are now 3 decades worth of studies documenting the extent to which, when you integrate women's voices in a equitable way on boards, in organizations, it's not surprising that that diversity improves everything. The research is better, healthcare is more effective and reliable, workplaces are happier, customer engagement is easier, because women are able to reflect the realities of half the population.
Hmm. Why do so few women run for politics, and what are the things that they face that maybe prevent them or dissuade them from entering the political realm?
Well, this is a two-part answer to your question, because I think I want to challenge the notion that women don't run for politics. And so I'll come back to that. There are obviously lots of deterrents to participating in politics, and not just for women, but many men who would also be very desirable political representatives also decline to run, because if, especially at the federal level, you're having to travel from Outport, Newfoundland, or the BC coast to Ottawa, that's an onerous responsibility, the travel, the public element of the job, the fact that you then become a target. And
Hmm.
because social media makes it really easy to troll people, to target them in ways that didn't used to happen 30 years ago. Those are deterrents. And then Parliament itself and many city councils also, if they're really dominated by men, end up being testosterone heavy, elbows up in the corner, very combative, conflictual. That's often a very unappealing environment for women who are still socialized from birth to be more collaborative, to seek to find common ground, to work together. And I'm not saying that men are necessarily by nature looking for a fight, but we do socialize men and women very differently still. And so the balance of power, having women's presence there, will often change the tenor of the debate. You know, one of the things that I think is important to comment on is that because 59 countries around the world are doing a better job of this, they haven't solved the trolling, the online hate problem. So their societies are just as vulnerable to those forces as ours are. But what they have done is put in place measures to ensure that women are represented. One other thing that I think is really interesting, and I only learned this recently, the Samara Center for Democracy did an analysis between 2004 and 2019, and they looked at all of the candidates that ran federally for all of the political parties. Only 17% of those candidates surfaced through a competitive riding association bid. So 83% of them were appointed by the political parties themselves. And when political parties appoint candidates, they can go out and deliberately recruit really strong people from the community who have the opportunity to effectively represent their citizens. And so what we know is that they're mostly appointing men. And, you know, that was a revelation to me. We think, well, women aren't running. Well, no, often women are not being invited, encouraged, and asked to run.
All right. Now, Shari, you're based in Calgary, right?
Yes, I am.
And I know that well, a few months back, the mayor here, Jody Gondek, had put out a lot of stuff on social media and the types of things that she faced. Was it? I guess that probably wasn't surprising to you, that the number of different things that she faced being female and being mayor of the city.
Sadly, it was not surprising to me. Yeah, the way in which she was targeted was egregious and brutal. But informed opinions, in the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years, we have been specifically campaigning around we're calling it the toxic hush of online hate, because of its capacity to silence not Jody Gondek, thankfully, and not many other women are continuing to speak up despite being targeted. But if you are a woman and you have a public voice, whether you're a journalist or a politician or an advocate, and if on top of that you happen to be a woman of color, a Black woman, a brown woman, an immigrant woman, a visible minority, if you have an accent, if you are lesbian or trans, you're even more likely to be targeted with vicious hate. And, you know, I started writing a column in Vancouver more than 30 years ago, and I got lots of negative hate mail. But it's different today, because in, 1995, when I started writing a column, somebody had to find the address of the Vancouver Sun. They had to find an envelope and a stamp. They had to write the letter or type it, mail it. And today, of course, that abuse can happen in an instant with the click of a mouse. So it's absolutely true that that is a problem, and it's a deterrent. And we're working to encourage government and the platforms themselves to address that by not making anonymity so easy, by taking down material that is explicitly abusive and threatening. The fact that Jyoti Gondek and other women are still willing to step forward and speak up, I think, is reflective of the ambition that many women have to make change in their communities and serve the public in the way that democracy gives them an opportunity to do so.
So what can political parties especially do to balance out that power and representation?
So one of the things that is happening in other countries and allowing them to do a much better job of ensuring women's voices are reflected is that they are voluntarily embracing gender quotas. So in New Zealand, for example, 49% of elected officials in New Zealand are women. In Iceland, it's 47%. Both of those countries, the political parties have adopted these voluntary quotas. And so when they go out to recruit candidates, they are very conscious of making sure that they do so in a way that reflects the population. So if your candidates are 50% women, then it's much easier to ensure that your caucus and your cabinet is also 50% women. Here in Alberta, in 2015, I've only lived here for 2 years, but in 2015, when Rachel Notley, as the leader of the NDP, was running in the 2015 election, no real expectation that the NDP would assume power. But she was very deliberate about telling her colleagues, don't even think about bringing me a roster of candidates that does not reflect the population. And so she had 50% candidates. When the NDP were elected and became the governing party in Alberta in 2015, her caucus was 50% female. It was a no-brainer for her to be able to appoint a gender-balanced cabinet. And so political parties really have an enormous amount of power and influence here if they choose to exercise it.
Okay, before we sign off, Shari, tell me a little bit about Informed Opinions, what it is, how it started, why it started.
Thank you. So 13 years ago, reading my morning paper, I made a rough calculation off the side of my breakfast table over the course of a month, documenting what percentage of the commentary, the columns and the op-eds were written by women, because writing commentary and columns was something I'd been doing for 20 years. And when I finished the calculation and realized that only a quarter of them in 2009 were by women, I thought, okay, this is something I can contribute to fixing, because I am an educator, I'm an advocate, and I can train women to do this. It's not rocket science. Women actually go to university in higher rates in Canada than men do. We have expert women across all sectors and fields in this country. And so Informed Opinions was started as a project of Media Watch to support and train women to engage in public discourse. And so over the last 13 years, we have probably trained more than 5,000 women from universities, from the private sector, from nonprofit organizations, to be more comfortable and understand this is how you write an op-ed and submit it. If you get a call from Mario or somebody else in the media and they're interested in you adding value to a conversation about something you know and care about, you need to say, not, I'm not the best person, which is often women's default, but instead you need to say, yes, here's how I can add value and weigh in. And so we now also, in addition to training women, we have a database of experts that makes it easier for producers and reporters and journalists to find women on short notice who have expertise in their field and who will say yes when they're contacted, who have committed to ensuring that women's voices are better represented. So those are two of the key things we do, in addition to the research documenting the underrepresentation of women's voices and encouraging journalists to track the ratio of their sources and to be more deliberate about ensuring they're reflecting the realities of the full population.
All right. And just one last thing, if you could reiterate again where people can find information on the campaign.
Sure. So they can go to our website, informedopinions.org, and there's a link on the homepage to the campaign website, which is balanceofpower.ca. You can also follow us on Twitter at balancepowerca and on LinkedIn. And I'm also followable on social media at Shari Graydon. So we look forward to engaging Canadians in this conversation and inviting them to encourage their own representatives to respond to the question, how are you ensuring that women's voices are at the table?
All right. Thanks very much, Shari, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, that was Shari Graydon, who is CEO of Informed Opinions. I'm Mario Toneguzzi with Business Spotlight. Thanks for joining us today.